I never imagined I'd be standing here, in front of this extravagant high-rise, its glass windows gleaming under the golden city lights. The entrance was adorned with towering floral arrangements, and the guests stepping out of luxury vehicles were dressed in their finest. Women in shimmering gowns, men in tailored tuxedos, all laughing, mingling, living in a world of status and power. And here I was, invited to a wedding I had no business attending. Claudia's wedding. My ex-wife. For years, I had pushed her out of my mind, letting time and distance erase the bitter ending we had shared. I had moved on, or at least that's what I had convinced myself. But then, the invitation arrived, handwritten, elegant, deliberate. The moment I saw the familiar curve of her script, I felt something stir deep inside me. I hope you'll attend. That was all she had written. No explanation, no unnecessary pleasantries. Just those 4 words, weighted with meaning. I should have ignored it. But curiosity has a way of dragging a man into places he knows he shouldn't go. So, I came. Stepping inside the grand ballroom was like walking into another lifetime. The chandeliers hung like cascading crystals, illuminating the marble floors beneath my feet. Waiters glided through the room carrying glasses of champagne, and a live orchestra played a soft melody that melted into the air like silk. It was a world Claudia had always wanted, a world she had built for herself, far removed from the life we once shared. I kept to the shadows, unnoticed. At least, until I saw him. Richard, the man who had taken my place. I knew of him. How could I not? A finance mogul, one of the elite, a man whose face graced business magazines alongside my ex-wife's. He stood at the center of the crowd, basking in admiration, his arm possessively wrapped around Claudia's waist. And then his eyes locked onto me. For a moment, I thought he might ignore me, pretend I didn't exist, as if I were nothing more than a ghost from Claudia's past. But instead, he smirked, that condescending kind of smile men like him reserved for people they believed were beneath them. He leaned in close, his voice a quiet sneer. You're a middle school dropout, right? I stilled. Why don't you do yourself a favor and cut ties with my wife? The audacity. I slowly turned my gaze to meet his, studying the arrogance in his expression, the way his lips curled with satisfaction as if he expected me to shrink under his words. He had no idea who he was speaking to. I could have reacted, could have let my pride force me into a confrontation. But instead, I merely smiled, a knowing, amused kind of smile. Because if Richard thought I was a mere dropout, a forgotten footnote in Claudia's story, then he was in for a surprise he'd never see coming. There was a time when Claudia and I were inseparable. We weren't always these people. Her, the untouchable CEO of a major bank, and me, the man she had long left behind. There was a time when she looked at me the way a person looks at their world, with love, admiration, and a belief that together we could conquer anything. We met as teenagers, 2 people from vastly different backgrounds. Claudia had always been driven, her mind wired for ambition, for control, for calculated steps that would take her where she wanted to go. I, on the other hand, never cared for rules, for institutions, for paths that had been carved out by others. My heart belonged to music, to the piano, to the melodies that spoke louder than words ever could. Back then, she loved that about me. She would sit beside me on the piano bench, watching as my fingers danced across the keys, her head resting on my shoulder as I composed songs just for her. She told me my music made her feel alive, that it was the one thing in her structured world that felt unpredictable, real. You don't have to follow their rules, I had told her once. You can just live. She had smiled, a rare, soft smile that she only ever showed when it was just the 2 of us. I want the best for us. At the time, I believed her. But as the years passed, her love for my music turned into something else, something resentful, something disapproving. You can't just live on music alone, she would say, frustration creeping into her voice. What kind of life is that? To her, stability was everything. A future needed to be built, not left to chance. And in her mind, my refusal to conform, to chase promotions and degrees, meant that I had no future at all. At first, the changes were subtle, Little comments here and there, gentle nudges to think about my future, to consider something more stable. But soon, it became a divide too wide to ignore. I remember the night it all came to a head. We were in our small apartment, the one we had moved into after college, the one where I had spent nights composing while she buried herself in business textbooks. She had come home late, her expression unreadable, her posture tense. "We need to talk," she had said. I already knew what was coming. "This isn't working." I had simply nodded. There was no yelling, no pleading, no desperate attempts to make her stay. I could see it in her eyes. She had already decided. She left, and I let her go. And so Claudia climbed the corporate ladder, and I disappeared into my music, traveling from city to city, performing in jazz bars, on street corners, in grand halls. She built her empire, and I built mine. But the difference was, mine didn't need validation. Years passed. She became powerful, influential, a name that commanded respect. And I became something she never saw coming. And now, here we were. Her wedding. Her perfect world. And yet, for some reason, she had invited me. I looked around the ballroom, at the crystal chandeliers, at the towering floral centerpieces, at the people dressed in wealth and status. This was her world now. Why did you even come? I turned at the sound of the voice and found Marcus, Claudia's younger brother, standing beside me. Unlike his sister, Marcus had never judged me. If anything, he had admired my music, often sneaking into my performances just to listen. "Curiosity, I suppose," I replied with a smirk. Marcus exhaled, shaking his head. "Richard's an idiot. He doesn't know who you are, does he?" "No," I said simply. Marcus gave a half-laugh. "You could ruin him in a second, and he doesn't even know it." I shrugged. "That's the fun part." Just then, Richard's voice rang out again, louder this time, directed at me. "Why is someone like you even here? This event is for people of status." I turned my head slowly, meeting his gaze. He was enjoying this moment of superiority, this belief that he had won something, that I was nothing. I could have responded, could have humbled him with a few well-placed words. But instead, I simply chuckled, because this man had no idea who he had just insulted, and soon he would learn. The reception hall was grand, designed for people who lived their lives in the upper echelons of society. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, refracting golden light across tables set with silk napkins and polished silverware. A string quartet played in the background, the kind of elegant, restrained music that fit perfectly with Claudia's world. I took a sip of my drink, not particularly interested in the fine whiskey they were serving. Around me, conversations buzzed about stock markets, high-profile mergers, and political influence. This wasn't my world, and I had no desire to belong to it. Yet, despite that, I was here. I should have left the moment Richard threw his little insult my way. I had nothing to prove, nothing to gain from staying. But something about this moment, about standing in a room full of people who thought they knew everything, kept me rooted in place. And then, I saw him. Marcus. Unlike Claudia, Marcus had never let social status dictate his relationships. He had always been more open-minded, more genuine. He was a man who, despite his success as an investment analyst, still valued the simple things. We had met years ago, back when Claudia and I were still together. He was younger, still finding his way, and for some reason, he had gravitated toward me, intrigued by the way I lived. Where Claudia had seen irresponsibility, Marcus had seen freedom. He would sneak into my performances, absorbing the music as if it spoke to him in ways numbers and financial reports never could. And now, here he was, standing in front of me, shaking his head with a wry smile. "I told Claudia she shouldn't have invited you if Richard was going to act like that," he said, his voice low so only I could hear. "Let them have their moment," I replied, unaffected. "This is their night, after all." Marcus snorted. "That's generous of you. He doesn't deserve it, though. You know that, right?" I knew, but it wasn't my problem. Richard, however, was still enjoying his little power trip. "Why is someone like you even here?" he called out again, his voice deliberately loud enough for people nearby to hear. "This event is for people of status." I turned my head slightly, meeting his gaze. Around him, guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing the hostility in his words. But Richard didn't care. He was too drunk on his own arrogance to notice. I chuckled, a quiet, amused sound that made his brow furrow. "What's funny?" he demanded, taking a step closer. "Nothing," I replied smoothly. "I just find it interesting how people assume status is defined by the clothes you wear, the title on your business card, or the weight of your bank account." Richard scoffed. "That's because it is. And you? You're just some nobody my wife made the mistake of inviting." His words were designed to sting, to put me in my place. But I didn't react the way he wanted. Instead, I just smiled. Because in that moment, I realized something. Richard had no idea who I was. And neither did Claudia. I had spent years building a life outside of their world, away from corporate skyscrapers and high society gatherings. I had poured my soul into my music, traveled the world, performed in places they would never step foot in. I had built something for myself, something real, something lasting. And yet, in their eyes, I was still the same man Claudia had walked away from all those years ago. That was the real joke. Marcus, standing beside me, smirked as if he could read my thoughts. "You really don't know who he is, do you?" he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Richard to hear. Richard frowned, his bravado faltering for the first time. "What the hell are you talking about?" I could have told him. I could have let him in on the truth right then and there. But where was the fun in that? Instead, I just took another sip of my drink and turned away, letting Richard stew in his own ignorance. Because soon enough, he was going to find out exactly who I was. And when that moment came, it would be his world that shattered. I wasn't always the man standing in this lavish ballroom, exchanging smug glances with men like Richard. There was a time when my name meant nothing, when my pockets were empty, and when Claudia looked at me as if I were a burden rather than a partner. I had grown up in a world where money was plentiful, where my father's name carried weight in boardrooms and business circles. But that world collapsed overnight. One bad investment, one wrong decision, and everything was gone. The grand estate we once lived in, sold to pay off debts. The expensive cars, repossessed before we could even adjust to the reality of being broke. My father was never the same after that. I remember the morning I woke up to find him sitting in the kitchen, staring at nothing, a cup of untouched coffee in his trembling hands. He had built an empire and lost it all, and in his eyes, I saw a man who had no idea how to live outside of wealth. But I was different. I wasn't tied to the stock market, to the endless pursuit of status, to the belief that life's value was measured in dollars. What I had, what no financial collapse could ever take away, was my music. Even after we moved into a tiny apartment, stripped of every luxury, I didn't care. I had my old keyboard, a set of worn-out headphones, and an imagination that never stopped creating melodies. That was when I met Marcus. I had been playing in the school music room, my fingers gliding over the keys, lost in a song I hadn't even realized I was composing. The door creaked open, and I glanced up to see a younger boy standing in the doorway, eyes wide with awe. "That was incredible," he had said. We became friends almost instantly. Marcus had always admired my music. He would sneak into rehearsals, watching me play, asking endless questions about how I composed, how I turned emotions into sound. He was still a teenager, but even then, he had the sharp mind of a businessman. "You could make money from this," he told me once. Real money. I laughed at the idea. Back then, I wasn't thinking about fame or fortune. I just wanted to play. Then Claudia entered my life. She was everything I wasn't. Structured, disciplined, always chasing the next goal. At first, she admired my free spirit. She would sit beside me while I played, listening with a dreamy look in her eyes. But admiration slowly turned into frustration. "You need a plan," she would say. "You can't just play music forever and hope life works out." She wanted me to be something I wasn't. I didn't argue. I didn't try to change her mind. I just let her go. While she climbed the corporate ladder, I packed my bags and traveled. I played in jazz clubs, on street corners, in underground bars where people weren't looking for the next big thing. They just wanted to feel something real. And that was what my music did. It reached people. It spoke to them in ways words never could. I never cared about money, but money came anyway. I built a name for myself, not in boardrooms or skyscrapers, but in concert halls, in viral videos that racked up millions of views. My fan base spanned the globe, yet I never flaunted my success. And now, I was standing in Claudia's world once again, watching as her new husband sneered at me, completely oblivious to the fact that the middle school dropout he was mocking could buy and sell his entire empire 10 times over. Richard didn't know, but Marcus did. He stood beside me, his expression unreadable as he watched Richard dig himself deeper into his own arrogance. "You really don't know who he is, do you?" Marcus finally said, his voice calm, but laced with amusement. Richard turned to him with a frown. "What the hell are you talking about?" I let out a quiet chuckle, shaking my head. "Nothing," I said, taking another sip of my drink. "Enjoy your night." And with that, I turned away, leaving Richard stewing in his own ignorance. Because soon enough, he was going to find out exactly who I was. And when that moment came, the look on his face would be worth every second of this ridiculous night. The wedding ceremony had ended, and now the reception was in full swing. Guests clinked their champagne glasses, murmuring about business deals and luxury vacations while the orchestra played an elegant tune in the background. The waitstaff moved seamlessly between the tables, refilling drinks, offering delicately plated hors d'oeuvres, and ensuring that every guest's experience was nothing short of perfection. I had remained on the sidelines for most of the night, an outsider in a world I had deliberately left behind. But Claudia, always so careful about appearances, made her way toward me at last. She looked exactly as I remembered her, elegant, poised, the very definition of success. The gown she wore was an extension of that image, fitted to perfection, expensive enough to make a statement without seeming excessive. She stopped in front of me, hesitation flickering in her eyes. "You came," she said softly, as if she hadn't expected me to. I did. For a moment, she seemed unsure of what to say. Maybe she was wondering why I accepted the invitation in the first place. Maybe she wanted to know what I had been doing all these years. Or maybe she was simply realizing that I wasn't the same man she had left behind. Before she could say another word, he stepped in. Richard, the man who had spent the entire evening trying to belittle me, as if doing so would cement his own superiority. His arm wrapped around Claudia's waist, his grip firm, possessive. "Listen, drop out," he scoffed, his voice laced with arrogance. "My wife doesn't need someone like you lingering around. Cut ties and move on." It was almost comical. The way he stood there, so assured of his dominance, so convinced that I was nothing more than a footnote in Claudia's past. I let out a breath, shaking my head slightly. "All right," I said, pulling my phone out of my pocket. "I'll start by closing my $700 million account at your bank." The moment the words left my mouth, the air in the ballroom seemed to shift. Everything, every conversation, every clink of a champagne glass, every note from the orchestra, seemed to pause all at once. The people around us turned their heads, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. But the best reaction came from Richard himself. His smirk faltered. His confidence wavered. "What?" he stammered, as if he hadn't heard me correctly. I glanced at Claudia, who had gone pale, her grip tightening around the stem of the champagne glass in her hand. "You heard me," I said casually, tilting my head. "I'm withdrawing my $700 million. Your wife is the CEO. She can handle it, right?" Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room but chokes it. Marcus, who had been quietly watching from the sidelines, let out a low whistle, shaking his head in amusement. "Damn," he muttered under his breath. I turned my gaze back to Richard, who was struggling to process what had just happened. His hands twitched at his sides, his jaw tightening, his entire demeanor shifting from arrogance to outright panic. "You're lying," he finally said, but there was no conviction behind his words. Claudia, however, wasn't as quick to dismiss me. She reached out, grabbing my wrist, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're joking, right?" There was something in her eyes, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Fear. Not the fear of losing me. The fear of losing what I represented. I shrugged. slipping my phone back into my pocket. Why would I joke? I said lightly. Your husband wanted me gone. I'm just making it easier. The color drained from Richard's face. He turned sharply to Claudia, his voice breaking as he demanded, This is a joke, right? This guy doesn't have that kind of money. But before Claudia could respond, Marcus, who had been enjoying the scene far too much, let out a chuckle, shaking his head. You really don't know who he is, do you? Richard's eyes darted between Marcus and Claudia, his panic growing by the second. I could see it, the realization creeping in, the weight of his mistake settling heavily on his shoulders. And for the first time that night, he wasn't the one in control. I turned to leave, fully prepared to walk away and let them deal with the aftermath of their own arrogance. But just as I took a step forward, Richard grabbed my arm. Wait. I pulled my arm free, meeting his desperate gaze with an impassive stare. You made your point, he said, his voice unsteady. You're obviously successful. There's no need to. I cut him off with a simple tilt of my head. No need to what? I asked. Show you what happens when you underestimate people? Richard swallowed hard. I could see the desperation in his eyes, the frantic way his mind was scrambling for a way to salvage the situation. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough so that only he could hear. Next time, I murmured, be careful who you look down on. And with that, I turned away, leaving him standing there, speechless, humiliated, and fully aware that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The night was far from over, but one thing was certain. I had already won. The weight of my words hung heavy in the air, thickening the atmosphere of the once lavish celebration. The clinking of glasses had stopped, the hum of casual conversation replaced with stunned silence. Eyes darted toward Claudia, toward Richard, toward me. The dropout, the nobody, the man who was supposed to be insignificant. Except now, I wasn't. Now, I was the only person in this room who mattered. Claudia's grip on my wrist tightened, her fingers cold against my skin. I could see the panic blooming in her eyes, the careful facade of composure she had perfected over the years cracking at the edges. You're joking, right? She whispered again, her voice softer now, almost pleading. I tilted my head slightly, studying her. Claudia had always been meticulous, always in control. Every move she made was calculated, deliberate. But this was the first time I had ever seen her rattled. I let out a quiet chuckle. Why would I joke? I said smoothly, slipping my wrist free from her grasp. Your husband wanted me gone. I'm just making it easier. Richard finally snapped out of his stunned silence, shaking his head as if trying to shake off reality itself. His hands curled into fists at his sides, and for a moment, I almost thought he might try something stupid. This is ridiculous, he muttered under his breath before turning sharply to Claudia. Tell me this isn't real. Tell me he doesn't have that kind of money. But Claudia couldn't say anything, because she already knew the truth. She had always assumed she knew who I was. That when she left me behind, she had moved on to something better. And yet, here she was, realizing that I had become something far beyond what she could have imagined. Marcus, who had been watching the entire exchange with barely concealed amusement, finally let out a chuckle, shaking his head. You really don't know who he is, do you? He said, looking at Richard like he was the biggest idiot in the room. Richard turned to him, his face a mask of frustration. What the hell are you talking about? Marcus smirked. You should probably Google him. That was all it took. Within seconds, whispers rippled through the room, fingers tapping on phone screens as people looked me up. And then, just like that, the shift happened. I could feel it. The weight of 100 pairs of eyes flickering between me and the glowing screens in their hands. The slow realization washing over them. The collective gasp that followed. Someone near the back of the room exhaled a sharp breath. No way. Another voice, barely above a whisper. Wait, he's... Richard snatched Claudia's phone from her hands, his eyes scanning the screen, his expression twisting into something between shock and dread. And then, finally, the moment I had been waiting for. His hands shook, his confidence, so unwavering, so absolute, shattered. I watched as reality sank in, as he pieced together every mistake he had made tonight. Because now, he knew. I wasn't just some washed-up nobody from Claudia's past. I wasn't a dropout. I wasn't a failure. I was one of the most renowned pianists in the world. A musician with an audience of millions. A net worth that far surpassed his own. And the worst part? I had never needed to flaunt it. Richard's jaw clenched so tight, I thought he might break his teeth. He turned back to Claudia, his face ashen. "Did you know?" he demanded. Claudia didn't answer. Because she didn't have one. She had left me behind all those years ago, certain that I would amount to nothing. She had assumed that, without her, I would fade into obscurity. And now, at her own wedding, in front of everyone she respected, she was being forced to face the truth. Richard took a shaky breath, his mind undoubtedly scrambling for a way to fix this. "Look," he started, his voice low, measured. "There's no need to be rash. Let's just—" I raised a brow. "Rash?" He swallowed. "I'm just saying maybe we should talk. You don't actually have to close your account. I mean, let's be reasonable here." I studied him for a long moment. A part of me considered dragging this out, watching him squirm a little longer. But then I decided I was already bored. I turned my attention back to Claudia. "It's funny," I mused, "how things work out, isn't it?" She didn't answer. Couldn't. Because she knew that, no matter how much power or status she had built for herself, no matter how far ahead she had thought she had lost. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I had plotted some elaborate scheme to humiliate her. But because life had a way of evening things out. And tonight, fate had decided to settle the score. I turned away from them, stepping toward the exit, but Richard called after me one last time. "Wait, you're not actually closing your account, are you?" I smirked, not bothering to look back. "I'll think about it." And with that, I walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind a wedding that would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. I stepped out of the ballroom, but the echoes of the stunned silence behind me followed like an unspoken chorus. The night air was crisp against my skin as I moved toward the grand staircase leading down to the courtyard, my every step measured, deliberate. This wasn't how I had imagined the night going. Then again, I hadn't expected much when I first opened Claudia's invitation. I had assumed she sent it out of obligation, or maybe to prove something to herself, that she had moved on, that she had one. But now, I wasn't so sure, because the way she had looked at me back there, that wasn't the look of a woman who felt victorious. That was the look of a woman who had realized too late that she had miscalculated everything. The breeze carried the muffled hum of voices from inside, the party still continuing despite the tension that had fractured the perfect illusion. I could only imagine the whispers spreading now, the quiet conversations picking apart the moment they had all witnessed firsthand. I had spent years living outside of their world, and yet, in the span of one evening, I had somehow managed to redefine my presence within it. I reached the bottom of the steps, planning to call for a car when I heard hurried footsteps behind me. "Wait," I sighed before I even turned around. I already knew who it was. Claudia. She stood at the top of the stairs, her silhouette framed against the golden lights of the ballroom entrance. The way she held herself was the same as always, poised, elegant, still in control even when everything around her was falling apart. Except now, I could see the cracks. For the first time since I had arrived, she wasn't performing for an audience. She wasn't the unshakable CEO, the woman who had orchestrated this perfect evening. Right now, she was just Claudia, the same woman I had once shared late-night conversations with, the same woman who had once curled up beside me as I played the piano, letting my music lull her to sleep, the same woman who had walked away. I didn't move as she descended the stairs, her steps slower now, more hesitant. "We need to talk," she said, her voice quieter than before. "There's nothing left to say," I replied evenly. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe I was actually walking away from this. "I was wrong about you," she admitted, and I caught the slight tremor in her voice. "About everything." I let out a humorless chuckle, glancing up at the sky. The city lights flickered in the distance, the skyline an endless sprawl of glass and steel. Everything she had built her life around. "What part?" I asked, finally looking at her. The part where you assumed I'd never be anything? Or the part where you thought I'd always be there, waiting for you to realize your mistake? She flinched. Good. Because the truth had always been simple. She had never believed in me. Not really. She had loved me, once. But even back then, that love had always been conditional, hinged on the idea that one day I would change, that I would wake up and suddenly decide to chase the kind of success she valued. And when I didn't, she left. I didn't know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. That's the problem, isn't it? I said, tilting my head. You never asked. You never cared to know. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her fingers curling into the fabric of her wedding dress. You have no idea how many times I thought about calling you, she finally admitted. About asking if what? I interrupted. If I had changed? If I had finally become the person you wanted me to be? She swallowed hard. I took a step closer, my voice calm but firm. Claudia, you didn't leave me because I had no ambition. You left me because I refused to chase the kind of ambition you respected. Her breath hitched. And that's okay, I continued. You made your choice and I made mine. The difference is, I never regretted mine. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. She had spent years convincing herself that she had moved on, that her life was better without me, that she had everything she ever wanted. But now, on her wedding night, she was standing in front of me, struggling to find the words to justify her choices. She started, then sighed. I just wanted to know if you were happy. I smiled then, small, knowing. I was happy the moment I stopped needing your approval. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to respond, but nothing came out. There it was, the truth she had never considered, the realization that I had never been waiting for her to realize her mistake, that I had never needed closure, because I had already moved past it long before she had. And that was the real loss. Not that she had left me, but that when she looked at me now, she knew, deep in her bones, that she had let go of something she could never get back. I took one last glance at her before turning away for the final time. Richard would still be inside, trying to salvage his bruised ego, clinging to whatever dignity he had left. The guests would still be whispering about the scene they had just witnessed. And Claudia? Claudia would go back inside that ballroom, smile for the cameras, and play her part as the perfect bride. But tonight, long after the music faded and the guests left, she would lie awake knowing that she had built her perfect life, her perfect empire. And yet, somehow, she had still lost. I walked toward the waiting car, sliding into the back seat as the driver closed the door behind me. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through messages from people who actually mattered. Musicians, old friends, people who had never doubted me. And then, almost on impulse, I opened my music app. I hit record, and in the quiet of the car, as the city blurred past the window, I started playing the melody that had once been Claudia's favorite, for old friends and lessons learned. Because some memories don't need words. Some lessons don't need to be spoken. And some victories are won in silence. The city lights flickered past in a blur of gold and white as the car cruised through the quiet streets. The weight of the night should have settled by now, but I could still feel the tension lingering in my chest like an unfinished chord. I leaned back against the seat, fingers grazing over the screen of my phone as I scrolled through unread messages. My inbox was full. Congratulatory texts from old friends, amused comments from people who had witnessed the spectacle at the wedding, and even a few industry executives reaching out with offers I had no intention of entertaining. It was strange, the way the past had suddenly resurfaced in one night. I hadn't come to Claudia's wedding expecting a confrontation. I hadn't even come with the intention of proving anything. But life had a funny way of tying up loose ends in its own brutal, poetic fashion. And Claudia? She had received her lesson in respect the hard way. The thought brought a small smirk to my lips, but it quickly faded as my thumb hovered over an old contact in my phone. I stared at the name for a long moment before finally closing the screen. There was no point in looking back now. A soft chime interrupted my thoughts, and I glanced at my screen. Marcus, where the hell did you disappear to? You left before the real fun started. I chuckled, shaking my head before typing a quick response. Me. I figured the entertainment portion of the night was already handled. His reply came almost instantly. Marcus, you should have stayed a little longer. Richard nearly lost his mind after you left. It was the most satisfying thing I've ever seen. I could picture it perfectly. Richard, trying to salvage what little dignity he had left, frantically whispering to Claudia, demanding an explanation, realizing too late that he had just burned a bridge he should have never crossed. I could also imagine the whispers that would haunt them for weeks, if not months. The ex-husband was actually a millionaire? How did they not know? Claudia really downgraded. Huh? And the best part? I didn't even have to lift a finger to orchestrate any of it. I tucked my phone away and glanced out the window. The streets had emptied, the city settling into its quiet late-night rhythm. The car slowed as it approached my building, an understated yet elegant brownstone tucked away from the chaos of the downtown district. Unlike Claudia, I had never needed grand displays of wealth to prove anything. "We're here, sir," the driver said, stepping out to open the door for me. I gave him a nod before stepping onto the pavement, adjusting the cuff of my jacket as I inhaled the crisp night air. As I reached the door, a familiar voice called out from behind. "Leaving without a goodbye? That's cold, man." I turned to see Marcus leaning against his own car, a knowing grin on his face. "You didn't have to chase me down just to say that," I quipped, unlocking my front door. Marcus shoved his hands in his pockets, following me inside like he owned the place. What can I say? I had to see the aftermath for myself. "You made quite an exit back there." I shook my head, tossing my keys onto the table as we entered the living room. The space was simple, warm lighting, dark wood floors, an antique grand piano sitting in the corner. It was a far cry from the cold luxury Claudia had surrounded herself with. Marcus walked over to the piano, running his fingers along the polished surface before whistling. "You know, I always wondered where you ended up," he mused. "Turns out, you ended up on top. Quietly, of course, but still." I shrugged, pulling off my jacket. I never needed an audience. "Could have fooled me," Marcus chuckled. "The way you played them all tonight? That was a damn performance." I smirked, shaking my head. "That wasn't a performance," I corrected. "That was just reality hitting them a little harder than they expected." Marcus laughed, sinking into the couch. "You have no idea how much I've wanted to see Richard taken down a peg. He's been unbearable since day one. The moment Claudia started dating him, it was like he thought he owned the world. That explains why he acted like a complete idiot tonight," I muttered. Marcus nodded. "He's always been insecure. That's why he flaunts his money, why he always has to prove he's the most important person in the room. But you? You walked in without saying a damn word, and suddenly, he was the fool. That's power, my friend." I leaned against the armrest, my fingers absently tapping against my knee. "I didn't do it for power," I said. "I just wanted to remind them that some people don't need validation to be successful." Marcus exhaled, shaking his head with a grin. "And that's exactly why you won tonight." I fell silent, my gaze drifting toward the piano. "You know," Marcus said, leaning back, "Claudia didn't look too happy after you left." I raised a brow. "She's married now. Her happiness isn't my problem." "Maybe not," he admitted. "But let's be real. Tonight wasn't just a wedding for her. It was a statement. She wanted to show you that she had one. But instead, she got the exact opposite." I considered that for a moment, the thought settling into my chest like a final note at the end of a melody. "Maybe," I murmured. Marcus studied me for a long moment before sighing. "Well, if you ever want to rub it in just a little more, I've got plenty of stories about Richard that'll make you laugh." I chuckled, shaking my head. "I think I've done enough damage for one night." Marcus stood, stretching. "Fair enough. But don't be a stranger, all right? Some of us actually enjoy your company." "Noted," I said, walking him to the door. As he stepped out into the night, he turned back with one last smirk. "By the way, that whole 'I'll think about it' line, pure gold. Richard's probably still sweating over it." I laughed, watching as he disappeared down the street. Closing the door behind me, I exhaled deeply. The night had been unexpected, chaotic, a reminder of how far I had come. And yet, I felt lighter. Because now, there were no more ghosts from my past waiting in the shadows. No more unfinished stories. Just me, my music, and the life I had built on my own terms. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. There was no lingering weight in my chest, no unresolved emotions clawing at the edges of my mind. The past was exactly where it needed to be, behind me. The sunlight streamed through the curtains of my loft, warming the hardwood floors and casting long, golden streaks across the grand piano in the corner. The instrument had been with me through everything, from the days when I had nothing but a worn-out keyboard to now, when I had built a life far greater than what anyone had expected. As I stretched and pulled myself out of bed, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Marcus. I smirked, shaking my head. Of course, he wouldn't let last night die down just yet. I picked up the call and leaned against the window, watching the city come to life below me. "Please tell me you saw the news," Marcus said, his voice full of barely contained amusement. I raised an eyebrow. "Should I be concerned?" "Depends," he said. "Are you concerned about the fact that the entire wedding is trending?" I blinked. "Trending? What the hell are you talking about?" Marcus laughed. "Just check social media. Oh, and before you do, don't say I didn't warn you." I ended the call and immediately pulled up my phone, tapping into one of the news apps I rarely bothered with. And there it was. CEO's wedding becomes a night to remember, for all the wrong reasons. I scrolled further. My curiosity piqued. There were hundreds of posts, all dissecting what had happened last night, from Richard's arrogance to the moment he realized he had insulted the wrong man. One video had already gone viral, a recording of the exact moment I had said, "I'll start by closing my $700 million account at your bank." The caption? "The art of a silent flex." I exhaled, shaking my head in disbelief. I had never sought attention for what I did. I had spent years avoiding the very world that now seemed fascinated with me. And yet, here it was. The internet had caught on, and people were loving the irony. I scrolled further and found comments that ranged from brutal to outright hilarious. "Imagine marrying a man who doesn't even know his wife's ex could buy his company 3 times over. LMAO. Richard, why are you even here?" Him. "Just checking if my money's still safe in your wife's bank." Claudia's face when she realized she fumbled the bag, priceless. I shook my head, placing the phone on the counter. It was strange. For years, Claudia and I had lived completely separate lives, with no overlap, until last night. Now, our names were being spoken together again, but not in the way she had hoped. And I just knew, that she would hate every second of it. The thought made me chuckle as I made my way to the kitchen, brewing a fresh cup of coffee. But just as I took my first sip, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Marcus. It was Claudia. I stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether I should even bother answering. I had nothing left to say to her. I had walked away last night for a reason. And yet, something about the fact that she was calling me now, after everything, made me curious. I sighed before finally answering. "Claudia." There was silence on the other end. Then, finally, a sigh. "I assume you've seen the news?" I smirked. "Did you really think I wouldn't?" She let out a dry laugh, but there was no humor in it. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I leaned against the counter, tilting my head slightly. "And how exactly was it supposed to go?" She hesitated before responding. I didn't think it would turn into this. I didn't invite you to humiliate you." I scoffed. "No? Then why did Richard feel so comfortable trying to insult me in front of everyone?" She didn't answer right away. "He didn't know who you were," she admitted. I chuckled. That much was obvious. Another pause. "I thought you would have told me, you know." That caught me off guard. "Told you what?" "That you became this." I exhaled through my nose, shaking my head. "You never asked, Claudia." She sighed again. I know. There it was. The regret. Not just for last night. For everything. For walking away. For assuming I would never be anything. For realizing too late that she had been wrong about me. But I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of an emotional reunion. I had nothing left for her. "I don't know what you expect me to say, Claudia," I said evenly. "But whatever it is, I'm not interested. She let out a slow breath. I figured. Silence stretched between us again, heavier this time. I knew this would be the last time we ever spoke, and somehow I was okay with that. I hope you're happy, she said at last, her voice softer now, almost vulnerable. I am, I answered simply, because for the first time in years, I truly meant it. Without another word, I ended the call, placing my phone face down on the counter. And just like that, it was over. No more unfinished business. No more what-ifs. Just me, my music, and the life I had built on my own terms. The past was finally where it belonged. And I was exactly where I needed to be. The silence after the call was different from any I had experienced before. It wasn't heavy or suffocating like unfinished business. It was clean, like the last note of a song played exactly as it was meant to be. I stood there in my kitchen, my coffee now cooling in my hand, realizing something simple but profound. It was over. Not in the way heartbreak lingers. Not in the way some people tell themselves they've moved on but secretly still check old photos in the middle of the night. No, this was truly over. There was nothing left to say, nothing left unresolved. Claudia and I had walked separate paths for years, and last night had been the final crossroads where our worlds collided before splitting apart forever. And somehow, I had been given the last word, not just in conversation, but in the way life had played out. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need Claudia to beg for me back, nor did I need Richard to suffer beyond the public humiliation he had already earned. All I needed was what I already had, a life that was mine and mine alone. With a quiet sigh, I placed my phone down and turned to the one thing that had always made sense: music. My fingers found the smooth keys of the grand piano, and without thinking, I began to play. The melody was soft, almost bittersweet. It wasn't for Claudia, it was for me. A quiet reminder that I had never needed her validation, that I had always been enough, just as I was, that I had never been the one who lost. Halfway through the song, a notification lit up my phone screen. I nearly ignored it, but something told me to look. Marcus had sent me a video. I sighed, shaking my head. Of course he had. I pressed play, and then I laughed. It was a recording from inside the wedding hall after I had left. The camera was shaky, likely taken by someone trying not to get caught, but the audio was crystal clear. Richard stood near the table, his face red with fury, his hands gesturing wildly as he spoke to Claudia. What the hell were you thinking, inviting him here? Claudia looked exhausted, her face blank, her fingers massaging her temple. Richard, please. No, don't please me, he snapped. Do you realize what you've done? Do you know how many people were watching? How many of them are laughing at us right now? She exhaled. It wasn't supposed to go like this. Well, it did. Richard practically shouted. And now you've made me look like an idiot. One of his business partners tried to step in, speaking calmly. Richard, maybe we should sit? No, he interrupted, shaking his head. This was supposed to be about us. About me. And instead, I just got humiliated in front of everyone. Marcus's voice appeared in the background, dripping with amusement. Oh, don't take it so personally, Richard. You're just mad because you found out the hard way that you're not the most important man in your wife's life tonight. The audible gasp in the background was pure gold. Richard lost it. You think this is funny? He roared, moving toward Marcus, only for someone to hold him back. That guy, he's nobody. Just because he's got money doesn't mean. You're right, Marcus interrupted smoothly. His money isn't the point. It's the fact that he didn't even have to try to bring you down. He just existed, and it was enough. Richard's face contorted with rage. The video cut off. I laughed so hard I nearly choked. It was perfect. Richard had spent the whole night trying to prove his superiority, only to realize too late that he had never even been in the competition. And Claudia? She had miscalculated everything. I sent a quick text back to Marcus. I hope you know that video made my whole morning. His reply came immediately. Marcus, figured you'd appreciate it. Oh, and in case you were wondering, Richard didn't even sleep at home last night. Guy stormed off in the middle of the night. Classy. Huh? I smirked. Couldn't have happened to a better guy. Marcus responded with a string of laughing emojis before adding, Marcus, so, what's next for you? Now that your villain origin story is complete? I chuckled. Me? Nothing changes. I keep playing music, keep living my life. That's all I ever needed. Marcus's reply came slower this time. Marcus, you know, you really won, didn't you? I set my phone down, my fingers grazing over the piano keys again. Yeah, I did. Not because I had more money than Richard. Not because I had stolen the show at their wedding. But because I had never been trying to win in the first place. I had just been living. And that, more than anything, was the real victory. With one last deep breath, I placed my hands on the piano and began to play. The notes filled the room, rich and full, echoing through the quiet morning. No cameras, no audience, no expectations, just music, just me. And for the first time in a long time, that was more than enough. After 5 years of hard work, my wife's father, the boss, gave the promotion to his nephew, who'd been there 3 months. I submitted my resignation with a smile. Congrats to Jack, I said. When my wife's dad read my letter, he freaked out. Is this a joke? He started yelling when. My name is Marcus Hayes, and I'm 44 years old, standing in this sterile conference room that smells like burnt coffee and disappointment, clapping my hands together like some trained seal while my whole damn world crumbles around me. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead, casting that sickly yellow glow that makes everyone look like they're dying. And maybe that's fitting because something inside me sure as hell is. Jack Monroe, my wife's cousin, this 26-year-old kid who still asks me how to work the copy machine, just got announced as our new regional director. 3 months. The bastard's been here exactly 3 months, and now he's got the corner office with the view of downtown, while I'm still crammed into that shoebox next to the supply closet. 5 years I've been busting my ass for this company, building their logistics network from the ground up, staying late, coming in on weekends, missing Sophia's soccer games because the shipment from Phoenix needs to be tracked personally. Charles Alden, my father-in-law, stands at the head of that polished conference table like he's announcing the second coming instead of promoting his nephew over the guy who actually knows what the hell he's doing. His silver hair is perfectly styled. His suit probably costs more than I make in a month. And that smile. God, that smile makes me want to punch something. Jack brings fresh energy to our team. He's saying, his voice all smooth and practiced like he's giving a speech at the country club. New perspectives, innovative thinking, the kind of forward momentum that'll take Alden Ventures to the next level. Fresh energy. Right. The kid can barely manage his email without calling me over to explain why his computer is acting weird, when really he just forgot his password again. But there he sits, grinning like he won the lottery, probably already planning how he's going to redecorate my office. Excuse me, his office now. The one I helped design when we expanded last year. The one where I spent countless hours developing the supply chain protocols that made this company profitable. I'm still clapping, my palms starting to sting, and I catch sight of Janet from accounting giving me this look. Half pity, half, I told you so. She's been warning me for months that something like this was coming, but I kept thinking Charles would do the right thing. Family or not, merit matters, right? Apparently, I was wrong. Dead wrong. The thing that really gets me is how they're all looking at me, waiting to see if I'm going to crack, if I'm going to make a scene. My coworkers, people I've worked alongside for years, they know this is bullshit. They know I should be sitting where Jack is, but they're all scared for their own jobs, so they keep clapping and nodding like puppets on strings. Can't blame them, really. We've all got mortgages to pay. I know you'll all give Jack the same support you've given me over the years. Charles continues. And I swear to God, the irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. Support? I've been carrying this company's logistics department single-handedly while he plays golf with clients and takes 3-hour lunches. But sure, let's talk about support. Jack stands up, skinny kid, nervous energy, probably still shopping in the boys section, and clears his throat. Thanks, everyone. I'm really excited to work with such a talented team. His voice cracks a little on talented, and I almost feel sorry for him. Almost. Then I remember that he's about to be making twice what I make while I train him how to do the job I should have gotten. The meeting's winding down now, people starting to file out, murmuring their congratulations and making plans for lunch. I should leave. I should walk out of here and go back to my desk and pretend like this is normal, like this is just how business works. But my feet feel like they're glued to the industrial carpet, and there's this pressure in my chest like someone's sitting on my ribcage. Charles is shaking hands with Jack, probably giving him some wise grandfather advice about leadership and responsibility. And I want to laugh because the only thing Jack's going to be leading is this company straight into the ground. But I don't laugh. Instead, I walk over to them, extend my hand to Jack, and say the words that taste like sawdust in my mouth. Congratulations, Jack. Really well deserved. The lie comes out smooth as silk, and Jack pumps my hand like we're old friends, his palms sweaty and uncertain. Thanks, Marcus. I'm really going to need your help getting up to speed. Of course he is. Of course I'm going to be the one training my own replacement, showing him the ropes, explaining how everything works while he gets the title and the salary and the respect that should have been mine. Absolutely. I hear myself saying, still wearing that fake smile that's starting to make my face hurt. Whatever you need. Charles beams at this little exchange, probably thinking he's handled this transition beautifully, that he's managed to keep everyone happy. He has no idea that something fundamental just shifted in this room, that the loyal son-in-law he's been taking for granted just realized exactly where he stands in the pecking order. As I finally make it back to my desk, my hands are shaking slightly, and I can't tell if it's from anger or something else entirely. Maybe it's relief. Maybe it's the first time in 5 years I'm seeing this place clearly, without the rose-colored glasses of hoping things would eventually work out fairly. The fluorescent light above my desk flickers and buzzes, just like always, but somehow it sounds different now, like a warning bell, or maybe like time running out. I sit down in my chair, stare at my computer screen, and for the first time since I started working here, I know with absolute certainty that I'm done. You know what's funny about betrayal? It doesn't happen all at once like in the movies. It's not some dramatic moment where the villain twirls his mustache and reveals his master plan. No. It creeps up on you like carbon monoxide, odorless, colorless, and by the time you realize what's happening, you're already half dead. 6 months ago, I was sitting in my cubicle working on the quarterly logistics report when Charles strolled over with his coffee mug, the one that says, "World's Greatest Grandpa," that Sophia gave him last Christmas. Back then, I still thought family meant something to him beyond just blood relations and tax benefits. "Hey, Marcus," he said, settling that fake casual tone he uses when he's about to drop something on you. "I wanted to run something by you. My nephew Jack, Brielle's cousin, you remember him from the wedding. He's finishing up his MBA at Wharton. Bright kid, really sharp. I'm thinking about bringing him in for a summer internship. Maybe let him see how the business world works." An internship. That's what he called it. I should have known right then that Charles Alden doesn't do anything small, doesn't make casual decisions about family members. But I was focused on the Morrison account that was going sideways, trying to figure out why our shipping costs had spiked 30% in 2 weeks, so I just nodded and said something like, "Sure, sounds good. Always happy to help out family." Family. Christ, I actually used that word with a straight face. 3 weeks later, Jack Monroe walked through our front doors wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car payment, carrying a leather briefcase that still had the price tag tucked inside the handle. I watched him from my desk as Charles gave him the grand tour, introducing him to everyone like he was visiting royalty instead of some college kid who'd never worked a real day in his life. But here's the thing that should have set off every alarm bell in my head. Charles didn't just stick Jack in some corner with a stack of filing or make him fetch coffee like every other intern in the history of corporate America. No, Jack got an office. Not a big one, but an office with a door and a window and his name on a little placard that read Jack Monroe, Management Trainee. Management Trainee, not intern. Not summer help. Management fucking trainee. And where was this office located? Right next to Charles's corner suite. Close enough that they could chat through their open doors about golf handicaps and stock portfolios while the rest of us worker bees buzzed around trying to keep the company running. I trained him because that's what you do when you're a professional, when you still believe in doing the right thing even when your gut is screaming that something's off. Jack was eager enough. I'll give him that. He asked a million questions, took notes on everything, stayed late sometimes trying to understand how our vendor relationships worked. Part of me even liked the kid. He reminded me of myself when I first started, all ambition and energy, and hope that hard work actually meant something. But I started noticing things. Little things at first, like how Charles would call Jack into closed-door meetings that could have been emails. How Jack suddenly knew details about upcoming contracts that I hadn't been briefed on yet. How he'd casually mention conversations with department heads that happened when I wasn't around. The real wake-up call came about 2 months into Jack's internship. I was working late, trying to sort out a mess with our Phoenix distributor, when I heard voices coming from Charles's office. The door was cracked open just enough that I could see them sitting across from each other. Charles behind his massive oak desk, and Jack in one of those expensive leather chairs that probably cost more than most people make in a week. Marcus is dependable, Charles was saying, his voice carrying that tone he uses when he's explaining something to a child. He knows the systems inside and out, understands our clients, keeps everything running smooth. But Marcus doesn't have the credentials, doesn't have the vision for where this company needs to go. He's blue-collar smart, not boardroom smart. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, but I kept listening. You've got the degree, Jack. MBA from Wharton. That opens doors that Marcus's experience never will. And more importantly, your family. This company's been in the Alden name for 3 generations. I need someone I can trust completely, someone who understands that loyalty goes both ways. Jack's voice was quieter, harder to hear, but I caught enough. What about Marcus? He's family too, isn't he? Married to Brielle and all. Charles laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that makes your skin crawl. Marriage is just paperwork, son. Blood is forever. Marcus is useful, don't get me wrong. He'll make an excellent number 2, perfect for handling the day-to-day operations while you focus on strategy and growth. Number 2. After 5 years of building this place from the ground up, after missing family dinners and weekend barbecues in my daughter's school plays, I was going to be the number 2 to a kid who didn't know the difference between a bill of lading and a packing slip. That's when it all clicked into place, like puzzle pieces falling into a picture I didn't want to see. This wasn't about Jack learning the business or getting some real-world experience before heading off to his daddy's law firm or whatever. This was about Charles grooming his replacement, and I was just the hired help who'd been stupid enough to think that marrying into the family meant I was actually part of it. I crept back to my desk, grabbed my jacket, and drove home in silence while my brain tried to process what I'd just heard. Brielle was already asleep when I got there, and I sat in my kitchen drinking a beer and staring at the photos on our refrigerator. Sophia at her last soccer game, the 3 of us at Disney World 2 summers ago, Charles and his wife at our wedding, all smiles and promises about family sticking together. I wasn't being overlooked for the promotion I deserved. I was being used, plain and simple, kept around just long enough to train my replacement and make sure the transition went smoothly. And the worst part? I'd been grateful for the opportunity. Brielle always had this way of cutting through my bullshit with surgical precision, like she could see right through all the excuses and rationalizations I'd built up over the years. We'd been married for 18 years, and in that time, she'd watched me take hits that would have sent most guys straight to HR or out the door looking for a new job. But not me. Never me. You let people walk over you, Marcus, she'd said about 6 months ago, standing in our kitchen with that look she gets when she's trying to decide whether to hug me or shake some sense into me. We'd just gotten back from one of Charles's dinner parties, you know, the kind where he invites all the department heads and their spouses over to his mansion so we can pretend we're all one big happy family while he reminds everyone exactly who signs the paychecks. That particular night, Charles had spent 20 minutes telling everyone about Jack's brilliant insights during his first week, how the kid was already identifying inefficiencies that us old-timers had missed. I'd sat there nodding and smiling like a good little employee while my wife watched me swallow my pride with my overpriced steak. I don't let people walk over me. I told her, loading the dishwasher with more force than necessary. I'm being professional. There's a difference. She'd given me that look, the one that said she loved me but thought I was being an idiot. Professional is one thing, honey. Being a doormat is something else entirely. When was the last time you stood up for yourself at that place? Really stood up, not just complained about it to me later. I couldn't answer her then because she was right, and we both knew it. I'd built a career out of keeping my head down, doing the work, believing that eventually someone would notice and reward all that quiet dedication. But quiet dedication doesn't get you promoted when the boss's nephew needs a job, does it? Now here I am, 3 days after watching Jack get handed my future on a silver platter, lying in bed at 2 in the morning staring at the ceiling fan that's been making that weird clicking noise for 6 months, but I keep forgetting to fix. Brielle's asleep next to me, breathing soft and steady, and I'm thinking about what she said. About being a doormat. About standing up for myself. The worst part is thinking about Sophia. My daughter's 16 now, all legs and attitude and dreams about becoming a marine biologist, because she wants to save the ocean or some equally impossible and beautiful thing that only teenagers can believe in completely. She looks at me like I'm Superman, like I've got all the answers and the world makes sense because Dad's got everything under control. What kind of example am I setting for her? What am I teaching my daughter about self-respect and standing up for what's right when I can't even stand up for myself in my own workplace? She's been asking me about college lately, talking about applications and scholarships, and I keep telling her the same thing I've been saying since she was old enough to understand. Work hard, be honest, treat people right, and good things will happen. But that's a lie, isn't it? I've been working hard for 5 years, been honest to a fault, treated everyone with respect. And what did it get me? A front row seat to watching some kid who doesn't know jack shit about logistics get handed the job I've been earning one day at a time. How can I look Sophia in the eye and keep feeding her that line about hard work paying off when I'm living proof that sometimes it doesn't matter how hard you work or how good you are at your job? Sometimes what matters is whose DNA you share and whether you went to the right school with the right people. But here's the thing that's really eating at me. I'm not just angry about the promotion anymore. I'm angry at myself for being surprised, for being naive enough to think that family meant I was safe, that loyalty was a two-way street in the Alden household. I'm angry that I've spent so many years making excuses for Charles's behavior, telling myself he was just a demanding boss, when really he was just an asshole with a trust fund. And I'm scared. Scared of what happens next, scared of walking away from the only job I've had since college, scared of starting over at 44 with a mortgage and a kid who's counting on me to pay for her education. It's easy to talk tough when you're young and stupid and don't have anything to lose. It's a lot harder when you've got responsibilities and people depending on you. But you know what scares me more than starting over? The idea of staying put, of spending the next 20 years training other people's kids to be my boss, of watching Sophia grow up thinking her dad's okay with being treated like garbage as long as the paycheck clears. Brielle shifts next to me, making that little sound she makes when she's dreaming, and I think about waking her up, telling her what I'm thinking about doing. But I already know what she'd say. She'd tell me she's proud of me for finally growing a backbone. She'd probably say she's been waiting years for me to get mad enough to do something about it. The ceiling fan keeps clicking, and somewhere in the distance, I can hear a train whistle, probably the freight line that runs behind the industrial park where our warehouse is located. I've heard that sound 1,000 times driving to work, but tonight it sounds different. Tonight it sounds like it's calling me somewhere else, somewhere better. I reach over to my nightstand and grab my phone, opening up my notes app. My fingers hover over the keyboard for a second, and then I start typing. Dear Charles, please accept this letter as my formal resignation from Alden Ventures, effective 2 weeks from today's date. My mistake to make, right? Well, maybe it's time I started making some mistakes that actually matter. Friday morning came like a reckoning, gray and cold with that kind of drizzle that makes everything look depressing as hell. I'd been carrying that resignation letter in my jacket pocket for 3 days, folded up neat and clean in a white envelope with Charles's name written across the front in my best handwriting. Every time I reached for it, every time I thought about walking into his office and ending this charade once and for all, I'd chicken out and tell myself I needed more time to think it through. But Thursday night changed everything. I'd gotten home from another soul-crushing day of watching Jack fumble through basic spreadsheets while everyone praised his fresh perspective, and Sophia was at the kitchen table doing her homework. She looked up when I walked in, and I swear to God, I saw something in her eyes that made my chest tight. Pity. My own daughter was looking at me with pity. "Dad," she'd said, closing her chemistry textbook, "are you okay? You seem really tired lately." Tired? Jesus, I wasn't tired. I was dying inside, one small humiliation at a time, and my 16-year-old daughter could see it written all over my face. That's when I knew I couldn't wait another day, couldn't spend another weekend rehearsing speeches in my head or making excuses about why Monday would be better. So here I am, standing outside Charles's office at 9:47 a.m., listening to him talk on the phone about his golf game last weekend while I work up the courage to knock. Through the glass, I can see him leaning back in that leather chair that probably costs more than most people's cars, feet up on his desk, laughing at something whoever he's talking to just said. This is the man who's been playing puppet master with my life, treating me like some kind of employee he can move around the board however he sees fit. I knock 3 times, sharp and professional, and he waves me in without even looking up from his conversation. "Hold on, Jim," he says into the phone, then covers the mouthpiece with his hand. "What's up, Marcus? Make it quick. I've got the mayor on the line." The mayor? Of course he does. Charles Alden doesn't just run a logistics company. He runs half the city council and probably has the fire chief's direct number saved in his contacts. That's the world I've been trying to belong to for 5 years. The world where connections matter more than competence and family names open doors that merit can't even find. "I need to give you something," I say, pulling the envelope from my jacket pocket. It feels heavier than paper should, weighted down with all the words I've been too scared to say out loud. "What's this?" he asks, still holding the phone, and I can hear Jim, whoever he is, asking if everything's all right on the other end. Charles sets the phone down without hanging up and takes the envelope, turning it over in his hands like he's never seen one before. When he opens it and starts reading, I watch his face go through this whole transformation. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something that looks almost like panic before settling into anger. "Is this a joke?" he shouts, loud enough that I'm pretty sure half the office can hear him through the glass walls. The phone is still off the hook, and I can hear Jim's tinny voice asking what's going on, but Charles ignores him completely. "You're quitting because Jack got promoted?" There it is, the question that reduces 5 years of dedication and expertise down to petty jealousy. Like I'm some kind of spoiled child throwing a tantrum because someone else got the toy I wanted. But I'm not going to let him frame this his way, not this time. "I've made my decision, Charles," I say, keeping my voice level and professional even though my heart's hammering against my ribs. 2 weeks' notice, effective immediately. He stands up so fast his chair spins backward and hits the credenza behind his desk, sending his golf trophies rattling. 2 weeks? Are you out of your goddamn mind? Do you have any idea what this will do to operations? We've got the Morrison contract renewal next month, the Phoenix expansion project, the quarterly review with corporate. I'm sure Jack can handle it. I interrupt, and the look on his face is almost worth the 5 years of frustration I've been swallowing. After all, he's got that MBA from Wharton. Fresh perspective, innovative thinking, all that. Charles's face is getting redder by the second, and I can see that vein in his forehead starting to bulge the way it does when suppliers are late with deliveries. What about Brielle? What about Sophia? You're walking away from your family. And there it is, the guilt trip I've been expecting, the emotional manipulation disguised as concern. He's going to make this about family loyalty, about responsibility, about everything except the fact that he chose his nephew over his son-in-law and expected me to smile and take it. "No, Charles," I say, and for the first time in 5 years, I'm smiling at him without having to force it. "I'm walking away from you." The words hang in the air between us like smoke, and I can see him processing what I just said, trying to figure out his next move. Behind him, Jim's voice is still coming through the phone, asking if he should call back later, but Charles doesn't seem to hear him anymore. This is it. The moment I've been building towards since that night, I overheard him talking about blood being thicker than marriage licenses. This is me finally standing up, finally saying enough is enough, finally choosing my own dignity over a paycheck. I turn to walk out, but Charles isn't done yet. "You'll never get a reference from me," he calls after me, his voice cracking slightly like he's not used to people walking away from him mid-conversation. I stop at his door and look back at him. This man who married off his daughter to secure a loyal employee, who spent 5 years taking credit for my work while keeping me just grateful enough to stick around. I won't need one, I tell him, and this time when I walk away, I don't look back. Charles thought he was calling my bluff, sitting there behind his overpriced desk with that smug look he gets when he thinks he's got all the cards. "You'll never get a reference from me," he'd said, like that was supposed to send me crawling back with my tail between my legs, begging for forgiveness and promising to be a good little employee who knows his place. What Charles doesn't understand, what he's never understood, is that this industry isn't as big as people think. Logistics and supply chain management might sound fancy and corporate, but at the end of the day, it's still a small world where everybody knows everybody, where your reputation travels faster than gossip at a church potluck. I'd been smart about this, smarter than Charles gave me credit for. While he was busy grooming his golden boy nephew and planning my professional funeral, I'd been quietly updating my resume, reaching out to old contacts, testing the waters to see what was out there for a guy like me. Not because I was planning to leave. Hell, 2 weeks ago, I was still hoping things might work out, but because Brielle had drilled it into my head that I needed to have options. "Never put all your eggs in one basket," she'd said after another one of those dinner parties where I came home feeling like I'd been kicked in the teeth. Especially when the basket belongs to someone who doesn't respect you. The first person I'd reached out to was Olive Brooks at Horizon Tech. Olive and I had worked together about 7 years ago when she was still climbing the corporate ladder at Morrison Industries, back before she jumped ship to become managing director at one of the fastest-growing logistics companies in the Southwest. She's tough as nails, smart as hell, and doesn't give a damn about your pedigree if you can get the job done. I'd sent her a casual email 3 weeks ago, nothing formal, just a "hey, how are things going? Would love to catch up over coffee sometime" kind of message. She'd responded the same day, which should have told me something right there. "Marcus, great to hear from you. I've been following your work at Alden Ventures through the industry reports. Impressive stuff with the Phoenix Distribution Network. Let's definitely grab lunch soon." Then there was Rudy Marlowe at Westline Logistics. Rudy's one of those guys who's been in the business since before computers, started loading trucks when he was 18, and worked his way up to regional operations manager through pure grit and determination. He'd been trying to poach me for 2 years, sending me Christmas cards with little notes like, "Doors always open if you get tired of working for amateurs." The thing about this industry is that results speak louder than diplomas, and my results had been speaking pretty damn loudly for the past 5 years. The Phoenix Distribution Network that Olive mentioned, that was my baby, a logistical nightmare that everyone said couldn't be done, until I figured out how to cut shipping times by 30% and reduce costs by almost 20%. The Morrison contract that Charles was so worried about losing? I'd been the point person on that account for 3 years, built a relationship with their procurement team that went way beyond just vendor-client bullshit. People talk in this business. They know who's really doing the work and who's just taking credit for it. They know that Charles Alden inherited his company from his daddy and has been coasting on family money and political connections ever since. They know that the real brains behind Alden Ventures' recent success has been the guy who married the boss's daughter and never got the recognition he deserved. So when I walked out of Charles's office with my dignity intact and my resignation letter delivered, I wasn't walking into the unknown. I was walking toward opportunity that had been waiting for me to grow a spine and reach for it. My phone buzzed before I'd even made it back to my desk. Text message from Olive. "Heard through the grapevine that you might be exploring new opportunities. Coffee this afternoon? I've got something that might interest you." The grapevine. Jesus, news travels fast in this business. I hadn't even cleaned out my desk yet, and already people were talking. But that's the thing about having a reputation. When you've spent years doing good work, people notice when you become available. I texted her back. "Coffee sounds great. 3 p.m. at Brewster's." "Perfect. And Marcus? Bring your resume." While I was typing my response, my work phone rang. Rudy Marlowe's name popped up on the caller ID, and I almost laughed out loud. "Marcus," his gravelly voice boomed through the receiver. "Tell me it's true. Tell me you finally told that pompous-ass father-in-law of yours to shove it." "News travels fast," I said, glancing around the office to see if anyone was listening. Jack was in Charles's office now, probably getting an emergency briefing on damage control, while the rest of the team pretended to work while obviously trying to figure out what all the shouting had been about. Faster than bad checks, my friend. So what's your plan? Please tell me you're not going to waste time with one of those corporate headhunter assholes who'll promise you the moon and deliver a pay cut. I'm exploring my options, I said, keeping it professional even though part of me wanted to tell Rudy exactly what I thought about Charles and his whole nepotistic empire. Well, explore this. Westline's opening a new Southwest division. We need someone who knows the territory, knows the players, and isn't afraid to get his hands dirty. Salary's negotiable, benefits are solid, and best of all, you'd be working for people who actually respect talent over family trees. I could hear Jack's voice through Charles's office door, high-pitched and nervous, probably asking what he was supposed to do about the Morrison renewal without me there to hold his hand. Part of me felt bad for the kid. He hadn't asked to be thrown into this mess, hadn't asked to be the weapon Charles used to cut me down to size. But that was Charles's problem now, not mine. Send me the details, Rudy, I said. I'll take a look. Already in your inbox, along with the contact info for our HR director. Marcus, I'm not going to blow smoke up your ass. This industry needs guys like you. Guys who actually know what they're doing instead of just talking a good game. Charles Alden just made the biggest mistake of his professional life, and his loss is going to be somebody else's gain. After I hung up, I sat at my desk for a minute, looking around at the office that had been my second home for 5 years. The motivational poster on the wall that said, "Teamwork makes the dream work." The coffee-stained carpet that maintenance never quite managed to clean properly. The view of the parking lot where I'd spent countless lunch breaks eating sandwiches in my car while working through vendor problems on my phone. I wasn't going to miss this place. But more importantly, I was starting to realize that this place was going to miss me a hell of a lot more than I was going to miss it. You know what they say about watching a train wreck? You can't look away even when you know it's going to be ugly as hell. That's what my last 2 weeks at Alden Ventures felt like, except I wasn't just watching the wreck happen. I was living in the middle of it while trying to maintain some shred of professional dignity. I could have been petty about it. God knows I had every reason to be. I could have walked out that Friday afternoon and left Jack to figure out 5 years' worth of systems and relationships on his own. Could have let Charles deal with the fallout of promoting an inexperienced kid over the guy who actually knew how to run the operation. Part of me wanted to do exactly that. Wanted to watch the whole thing burn down from a safe distance while sipping a beer and saying, "I told you so." But here's the thing about being a professional. It's not something you can turn on and off like a light switch. It's either who you are or it isn't. And I've never been the kind of guy who can walk away from people who are counting on me, even when their boss is a backstabbing asshole who thinks family means blood and nothing else. The team I'd trained over the years, Janet from accounting, Mike from shipping, Sarah who handled client communications, they didn't deserve to get caught in the crossfire of Charles's nepotism experiment. These were good people who'd busted their asses alongside me, who'd stayed late when deadlines got tight, and came in on weekends when emergencies popped up. They'd trusted me to have their backs, and I wasn't about to screw them over just because their boss had screwed me. And then there were the clients. Companies like Morrison Industries and Westfield Manufacturing, who'd built relationships with me personally over the years, who called my direct line when they had problems because they knew I'd get things sorted out fast and right the first time. These weren't just account numbers on a spreadsheet. They were real businesses with real people depending on our services to keep their operations running smooth. So I stayed, and I worked my ass off for 2 weeks, while watching Jack Monroe slowly realize that managing logistics operations isn't something you learn from textbooks and case studies. The kid tried, I'll give him that. He asked questions, took notes, even stayed late a couple nights trying to understand the vendor database I'd spent 3 years building from scratch. But there's a difference between understanding how something works and actually knowing how to make it work when everything goes sideways. Which brings me to the Portstone manufacturing disaster. Portstone had been one of our biggest accounts for 4 years, a reliable client who shipped heavy machinery parts across the Southwest and trusted us to coordinate everything from customs paperwork to final delivery. Their logistics manager, Tom Brennan, was old school, the kind of guy who valued relationships over contracts and expected you to answer your phone when he called, even if it was 6 p.m. on a Friday. Jack's first week flying solo, Tom calls with an emergency. 3 containers of critical parts sitting in Long Beach, customs hold because of some paperwork snafu, and Portstone's assembly line scheduled to shut down Monday morning if those parts don't make it to Phoenix by Sunday night. This is the kind of crisis that happens maybe twice a year, the kind that separates the professionals from the pretenders. I'm at my desk, supposedly training Jack on quarterly reporting procedures, when his phone rings. I watch him answer. See his face go pale as Tom explains the situation. Watch him fumble through our customs broker contact list like he's never seen it before. Mr. Brennan, Jack says, his voice getting higher with each word. Let me check on that and get back to you. He hangs up and looks at me with pure panic in his eyes. Marcus, I need help. There's some problem with customs in Long Beach, and this guy's talking about shutting down production lines, and I don't even know who we use for customs clearance. I could have told him to figure it out himself. Could have reminded him that he's the director now, that this is exactly the kind of decision-making he's getting paid the big bucks to handle. Instead, I pulled up the contact list, called our customs broker directly, and spent the next 4 hours coordinating with 3 different agencies to get those containers cleared and loaded onto emergency transport. By Sunday morning, the parts were in Phoenix and Portstone's assembly line started up right on schedule. Tom Brennan called Jack personally to thank him for pulling off another miracle, and Jack accepted the praise like he'd done anything more than hold the phone while I worked. But that was just the beginning. Over the next week, I watched Jack stumble through vendor negotiations he didn't understand, approve shipping routes that made no financial sense, and schedule deliveries that conflicted with driver availability. Every day brought a new crisis, and every day I found myself stepping in to clean up the mess before it became a disaster. The emergency protocols I developed over 5 years, who to call when shipments went missing, how to reroute deliveries around weather delays, which vendors could be trusted to handle rush orders. Jack had no clue about any of it. I started documenting everything, writing out step-by-step procedures for situations that used to be second nature to me. Not because I wanted to help Jack succeed. Hell no. I did it because I could see the writing on the wall, could see that Alden Ventures was about to lose clients, and I didn't want the people I'd worked with to get blamed for management stupidity. Charles, meanwhile, was getting more desperate by the day. His emails went from politely asking me to make sure Jack has everything he needs to practically begging me to consider staying on in a consulting capacity to help with the transition. Each message was a little more frantic than the last, and I could practically smell the fear through my computer screen. The man who'd been so confident about Jack's potential 2 weeks ago was starting to realize that potential doesn't mean shit when you've got 3 major accounts threatening to jump ship and a nephew who thinks logistics management is something you can learn from YouTube videos. But I kept showing up, kept doing the work, kept making sure that when I walked out that door for the last time, no one could say I'd burned the place down on my way out. Because that's the difference between a professional and an amateur. Professionals clean up their messes, even when someone else made them. Tuesday morning of my final week, I'm sitting at my desk updating the vendor emergency contact list, because apparently knowing who to call when shit hits the fan isn't something they teach at Wharton, when Charles's secretary, Mrs. Rodriguez, appears next to my cubicle like a ghost materializing out of thin air. Mr. Hayes, she says in that careful tone she uses when Charles is having one of his moods. Mr. Alden would like to see you in his office when you have a moment. When you have a moment. That's corporate speak for drop whatever you're doing and get your ass in here right now, but delivered with enough politeness that Charles can pretend he's being respectful. Mrs. Rodriguez has been Charles's secretary for 12 years, and she's got that diplomatic thing down to an art form. She knows exactly what kind of shitstorm has been brewing since I handed in my resignation, and the look in her eyes tells me she's rooting for me. Tell him I'll be right there, I say, saving my work and taking a deep breath. I've been expecting this conversation for days, watching Charles get more agitated as the reality of my departure sinks in. Yesterday, I caught him standing outside Jack's office, just listening to the poor kid struggle through a phone call with one of our freight brokers, and the expression on Charles's face was pure panic barely held in check. Charles's office looks different somehow when I walk in. Smaller, maybe, or just less impressive than it used to be. He's not behind his desk this time. Instead, he's sitting in one of the leather chairs he usually reserves for important clients, trying to look casual and friendly, like we're just 2 guys having a chat instead of employer and soon-to-be former employee. Marcus, he says, gesturing to the chair across from him with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. Sit down, please. I think we need to talk. I sit, but I don't relax. I can smell desperation on him like cheap cologne, and I know whatever's coming next is going to be some combination of manipulation, bribery, and emotional blackmail disguised as a business conversation. I've been thinking, he starts, leaning forward with his hands clasped together like he's about to share some profound wisdom. About your resignation, about the transition, about what's best for the company moving forward. And I think maybe we were a little hasty in how we handled the promotion situation. Hasty. Like promoting your nephew over your son-in-law was some kind of innocent oversight, instead of a calculated power play that he'd been planning for months. I'm listening, I say, keeping my voice neutral even though part of me wants to laugh at whatever bullshit he's about to try to sell me. What if we created a new position? He continues, warming up to his pitch like a used car salesman who thinks he's found the perfect sucker. Associate Director of Operations. You'd work alongside Jack, help him learn the ropes, but you'd have your own title, your own authority. Jack would be the director in name, but you'd both report directly to me. Think of it as co-management. Co-management. Jesus Christ, he actually said that with a straight face. Like I'm supposed to be grateful for the opportunity to babysit his nephew while pretending we're equals, like slapping a fancy title on a shit sandwich is going to make it taste better. And the salary? I ask, because I might as well hear the whole ridiculous offer before I turn it down. 15% increase, he says quickly, like he's been expecting that question. Plus performance bonuses tied to departmental efficiency metrics. And of course, when Jack's ready to move up to regional management, which could be sooner than you think, the director position would naturally be yours. Naturally, right? Because Charles Alden has such a stellar track record of promoting based on merit instead of bloodlines. I let the silence stretch out between us, watching him squirm in his expensive chair while he waits for my response. He's trying to read my face, trying to figure out if his little bribe is working, if he's found the right combination of money and promises to make me forget about 5 years of being overlooked and undervalued. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. I finally say, leaning back in my chair. You want me to stay here and train your nephew to do the job I should have gotten in the first place, while pretending that we're somehow equal partners in this arrangement. It's not about pretending, Marcus. It's about building a stronger management team, creating opportunities for growth. Charles, I interrupt, and something in my voice makes him stop talking. I'm not going to babysit your nephew while he figures out how to do my job. I'm not going to smile and nod while you call it co-management and pretend like this is some kind of promotion instead of what it really is. You panicking because you realize Jack can't handle what you've given him. His face starts to redden, that familiar flush creeping up from his collar. This is a generous offer, Marcus. Damn generous, considering the position you're putting us in by leaving during such a critical period. Critical period. Like my leaving is the problem instead of his decision to promote an unqualified kid over someone who's been carrying the department for 5 years. What about Brielle? He tries again, switching tactics like a politician who's lost the crowd. What about Sophia? This affects them too, you know. Your family's security, your daughter's college fund. And there it is. The guilt trip I've been waiting for. The emotional manipulation disguised as concern for my family's welfare. He's going to make this about my responsibilities as a husband and father, like staying in a job where I'm treated like garbage is somehow the noble thing to do. You're right, I say, standing up from my chair. This does affect my family. It affects what kind of example I set for my daughter about self-respect and standing up for yourself. It affects whether my wife continues to watch me come home every day a little more beaten down than the day before. Charles stands too, probably thinking he can physically intimidate me into changing my mind. You'll hurt your family with this decision, Marcus. You'll hurt people who care about you. I look at him. Really look at him. This man who married off his daughter to secure a loyal employee, who spent 5 years taking credit for my work while keeping me grateful for scraps from his table. This man who thinks loyalty is a one-way street that only flows uphill. No, Charles, I say, walking toward his door. You did that the day you chose nepotism over merit. You hurt my family when you decided that Jack's last name was more important than my 5 years of dedication. And you know what the really sad part is? You still don't get it. I pause at his doorway, and look back at him one last time. I'm not leaving because I'm angry about the promotion. I'm leaving because I finally realized what you really think of me, and I'm not willing to accept that anymore. As I walk back to my desk, I can hear him calling my name, but I don't turn around. Some bridges are meant to be burned, and this one's been overdue for a long time. The Horizon Tech building sits in the heart of downtown, like a gleaming monument to what happens when a company actually invests in its future instead of coasting on daddy's money and political connections. 43 floors of steel and glass reaching toward the sky, with those massive silver doors at the entrance that reflect the morning sun like mirrors. Standing on the sidewalk outside, adjusting my tie for the third time in 2 minutes, I can't help but think about the contrast with Alden Venture's tired old office building with its stained carpet and flickering fluorescent lights. My interview with Carmen Ease is scheduled for 10 a.m., and I'm here 20 minutes early because that's what professionals do. They show up prepared, on time, and ready to prove their worth. Not like Jack Monroe, who probably still needs GPS to find the bathroom in his own office building. The lobby is all polished marble and modern art, with a security desk manned by guys who look like they actually know what they're doing instead of just collecting paychecks. I give my name to the receptionist, a sharp-looking woman who greets me with a genuine smile instead of the barely concealed boredom I've gotten used to at Charles's place. "Mr. Hayes," she says, checking her computer screen, "Ms. Ease is ready for you. Take the express elevator to the 38th floor. Her assistant will meet you there." The elevator moves so smoothly, I barely feel it climbing. And when the doors open on 38, I'm looking at a workspace that actually looks like it belongs in the 21st century. Open floor plans that encourage collaboration, natural light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, people who look like they enjoy coming to work instead of counting down the hours until 5 o'clock. Carmen Ease's office overlooks the river, and she's standing at the window when her assistant shows me in. She turns around with a smile that reaches her eyes, extending her hand for a firm handshake that tells me everything I need to know about how she does business. "Marcus," she says, gesturing toward a conference table by the window instead of making me sit across from her desk like some kind of supplicant. "Great to finally meet in person. I've been following your work at Alden Ventures for years." Following my work. Not Charles's work, not the company's work, but mine specifically. It's been so long since someone recognized my individual contributions that I almost don't know how to respond. "The Phoenix distribution network was particularly impressive," she continues, settling into her chair with a coffee mug that says, "World's okayest boss." The kind of self-deprecating humor that Charles would never understand. Cutting shipping times by 30% while reducing costs. That's the kind of innovative thinking we need here at Horizon Tech. We talk for an hour about logistics challenges, about the changing landscape of supply chain management, about the difference between companies that embrace change and companies that resist it until they're forced to adapt or die. Carmen doesn't just ask about my experience. She asks about my vision, my ideas for improving efficiency, my thoughts on where the industry is heading. "Here's the thing, Marcus," she says, leaning forward with the kind of intensity that tells me she's about to get serious. "We're expanding our Southwest operations. New facility in Phoenix, direct partnerships with manufacturers in Mexico, the whole 9 yards. We need someone who understands the territory, who has the relationships and the expertise to make it work from day one." "What kind of position are we talking about?" I ask, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. "Lead Director of Southwest Operations," she says without hesitation. "Your own team, your own budget, full authority to structure things however you think works best. No co-management bullshit, no training your replacement. Just you, running the show the way you know it should be run." The salary she mentions makes my head spin, 40% higher than what Charles was paying me, plus performance bonuses that could push it even higher. Better health insurance, better retirement plan, 3 weeks paid vacation starting immediately instead of the 5-day maximum Charles allowed. But the real selling point isn't the money, though God knows that doesn't hurt. It's the respect. It's Carmen talking to me like I'm a professional whose opinion matters, like I'm someone whose expertise is valued instead of just tolerated. "I have to ask," Carmen says, her expression getting more serious. "Why are you leaving Alden Ventures? 5 years is a long time to walk away from, especially when you've built something as successful as that Phoenix network." I could give her the diplomatic answer. something about seeking new challenges and opportunities for growth. But Carmen strikes me as someone who appreciates honesty, someone who's dealt with enough corporate bullshit to recognize it when she hears it. Charles Alden promoted his nephew over me. I say simply, kid's got an MBA from Wharton and 3 months of experience. I've got 5 years of results and a track record of success. Family Connections won the day. Carmen nods like she's heard this story before, like she knows exactly how the old boys network operates and why companies like Alden Ventures keep losing talent to places like Horizon Tech. Their loss, she says, standing up and extending her hand again. Welcome to Horizon Tech, Marcus. When can you start? 2 weeks later, I'm cleaning out my desk at Alden Ventures for the last time, packing up 5 years of memories and frustrations into a cardboard box that doesn't seem nearly big enough to hold everything I'm leaving behind. Jack avoids eye contact when he walks past, probably still trying to figure out how to handle the Morrison account renewal without me there to hold his hand. Charles hasn't spoken to me since our last conversation in his office, which suits me just fine. I leave my security badge on Charles's desk along with a folder containing detailed instructions for every major account, emergency contact numbers, and step-by-step procedures for handling the kind of crises that Jack will inevitably face. Not because I owe Charles anything, but because the people who work here, the ones who didn't choose their boss, deserve better than to watch everything fall apart because of one man's pride and stupidity. Walking out through those glass doors for the last time, carrying my box of personal items and my head held high, I don't look back. Tomorrow morning, I start fresh at Horizon Tech, working for people who value competence over connections, results over relationships. For the first time in 5 years, I'm actually excited about going to work. 6 months into my new life at Horizon Tech, I'm sitting in my corner office, my actual corner office with windows that look out over the mountains instead of a parking lot. When Carmen walks in carrying a magazine with a grin that tells me she's got news. Take a look at this, she says, dropping the latest issue of Southwest Business Journal on my desk like it's Christmas morning. The cover story hits me like a punch to the gut, except instead of pain, it's pure satisfaction flowing through my veins. There's Charles Alden's face, looking about 10 years older than when I left, under a headline that reads, Alden Ventures loses 60% of major clients following management shakeup and nepotism allegations. I flipped through the article, and it's even better than the headline promised. Portstone Manufacturing terminated their contract after what the article diplomatically calls service delivery failures, but what I know was probably Jack screwing up another emergency shipment. Lancaster Group followed suit 3 weeks later, citing concerns about operational competency. Delmeyer Heavy Industries. The account I'd personally nursed back to health after their previous logistics provider screwed them over, jumped ship to our biggest competitor with a statement about seeking more experienced management. The article quotes an unnamed industry source saying, when you promote family over talent, this is what happens. Marcus Hayes was the operational backbone of that company, and losing him exposed just how thin their actual expertise really was. Gets better, Carmen says, settling into the chair across from my desk. Keep reading. The financial details are brutal. Stock price down 40%, layoffs across 3 departments, and a board of directors that's apparently decided Charles's leadership style isn't working out so well anymore. The article mentions that Charles stepped down to pursue other opportunities, which is corporate speak for got his ass fired by people who care more about profits than family loyalty. But the real kicker is buried in the last paragraph. Former regional director Jack Monroe, nephew of company founder Charles Alden, resigned his position last month to pursue additional education opportunities. Sources close to the company suggest Monroe's departure was related to operational difficulties following the loss of key personnel. Additional education opportunities. The kid went back to school, probably to learn what he should have known before Charles handed him a job he wasn't qualified for. Part of me feels bad for Jack. He never asked to be thrown into that mess, never asked to be the weapon Charles used to cut me down. But that's what happens when family politics collide with business reality. So what's the word on the street? I ask Carmen, though I'm pretty sure I already know the answer. Charles is scrambling to sell off assets and avoid lawsuits from investors who feel like they were misled about the company's stability. Word is he might lose the family compound in Scottsdale if things keep going south. Meanwhile, You've increased our Southwest Division's efficiency by 25% and landed 3 major contracts that your old competitors would kill for. I lean back in my chair, looking out at those mountains and thinking about how different my life is now. No more walking on eggshells around a boss who thinks I should be grateful for scraps. No more watching unqualified people get promoted over me because of whose blood runs in their veins. No more coming home exhausted from fighting battles I was never allowed to win. Carmen's right about the numbers. Our Southwest operations are crushing it. And it's not because I'm some kind of genius. It's because I'm finally working for people who let me do my job without interference, who judge results instead of resumes, who understand that trust and leadership can't be inherited like furniture. Charles never figured that out, and now he's paying the price. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor after all. A year and 3 months after walking out of Alden Ventures, I'm grabbing breakfast at Mickey's Diner near Sky Harbor Airport before catching a flight back to headquarters when I spot a familiar figure hunched over a corner booth. Jack Monroe sits alone with a cup of coffee and a textbook that's got supply chain management, principles and practices written across the cover in bold letters. The kid looks different, older somehow, like the past year has taught him things they don't cover in business school. His expensive suits have been replaced by jeans and a flannel shirt, and there's something in his posture that wasn't there before. Humility, maybe, or just the weight of understanding how badly he'd screwed up. I could walk right past him, pretend I didn't see him, catch my flight, and get back to my successful new life without looking backward. But something about the way he's studying that textbook, like his life depends on learning every word, makes me stop. Mind if I sit? I ask, gesturing to the empty side of his booth. Jack looks up, and for a second I think he's going to bolt for the door. But then he closes the book and gives me a tired smile that's got more maturity in it than anything I ever saw when he was playing director. Marcus, he says, sliding the textbook to one side. I wondered when I might run into you. Phoenix isn't that big a town in our business. I signal the waitress for coffee and settle into the booth across from him. Up close, I can see the changes even clearer. The cocky confidence is gone, replaced by something that looks like genuine self-awareness. How's the studying going? I ask, nodding toward the textbook. Jack laughs, but it's not bitter. Harder than I thought it would be. Turns out there's a lot they don't teach you in general business classes about actually managing logistics operations. Who knew? Planning to get back into it. Eventually, yeah, but the right way this time. From the ground up, learning the business instead of just inheriting a title I never earned. He takes a sip of his coffee and looks me straight in the eye. I deserve none of it, Marcus. The promotion, the office, the responsibility, none of it. But you still helped me when everything started falling apart. I won't forget that. The waitress brings my coffee, and I add cream while thinking about how to respond. The truth is, I did help him, even when I could have let him drown. Not because I liked him or thought he deserved it, but because that's who I am. You got thrown into a game you weren't ready for, I tell him. Charles put you in an impossible situation and expected you to succeed without the tools or knowledge to make it work. That wasn't all you. Maybe not all of it, Jack says, but I should have known better. Should have told Uncle Charles the first needed more time, more training, more everything before taking on that kind of responsibility. Pride, I guess. I wanted to prove I could handle it. And now I know that wanting something and being ready for it are two completely different things. I'm working for a small freight company in Tucson, learning how trucks actually get loaded and what happens when deliveries go wrong. Making about a third of what I was making at Alden Ventures, and I've never been happier to clock in every morning. I can respect that. There's something to be said for a guy who's willing to admit his mistakes and start over the hard way. What about Charles? I ask, though I'm not sure I really want to know. Jack's expression darkens a little. Uncle Charles isn't talking to me much these days. Last I heard, he was trying to sell the business to avoid bankruptcy, but there aren't many buyers interested in a company that's lost most of its major accounts. Funny how things work out. We sit in comfortable silence for a while, two guys who've been through the same storm from different sides. Jack's not the enemy anymore. Hell, he never really was. He was just a pawn in Charles's game, a weapon used against me that ended up backfiring spectacularly. When the check comes, I grab it before Jack can protest. Good luck with the studying, I tell him as we head toward the parking lot. And Jack, next time someone offers you a job you're not ready for, have the guts to say no. He nods, and I can see he means it. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way.